Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last, before the break, month ahead EU Public Affairs webinar. We do this, as many of you know, each month at the beginning of the month. We take a look ahead at the salient things to be on the lookout for in the bubble in EU Public Affairs. Our experts from AdvocacyStrategy, our partner company, will be presenting, Alan and Stefan, and I am the CEO of Lanzcape, which is a new monitoring app that you should definitely check out. So with that, and to keep it going, I'm just going to hand right over to Alan, and we're going to take a look at July and I suppose a little bit into the summer, and then we will be back again and hope to see you all back at the beginning of September with the following one. Alan?
Thank you very much, Michelle, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here again for the last session before the summer, although, as we will discuss in a minute, it may not quite be the relaxing summer that everybody is hoping for. Let's have a look at what we've got coming up this month. So let me jump you through the slides. So Michelle was going to tell you a bit more about Lanzcape and how it monitors everything that we're talking about today, and also gives you a level of advice similar to what we are giving you today. So I will kick us off this morning and talk about the Commission. Then I'm going to hand over to Stefan. Stefan is going to talk us through the Parliament, the Council, and a few other relevant developments that are happening in Brussels. And then I will close you off with a few bits of, let's say, fair warning as to how quiet the summer may not be when we all actually get there. Okay, so that's the run through. You know the drill. For those of you who've been present before, we're going to talk about the main milestones in the month of July for the Commission, the Parliament and the Council. We're going to discuss other developments, be that conferences, events, other major things that could have an impact in the coming month. And then we're just going to give you, as we generally do, some public affairs guidance as to where we think you should be focusing some of your time and energy in the coming months. So let's jump straight in. So we always start with where we landed last month. So for those of you who were with us in June, we were talking about digital omnibus. So the first elements of that coming out. We talked about the intensity of the work in the council, and we also talked about the sort of the coming point of the 1 year of the new term, of some sort of reflections and expectations and how that feeds into the future. So that was our June checklist. Well, if we go to July, the main things that we're going to be talking to you about today is, well, first and foremost, welcome Denmark. Of course, Denmark has kickstarted its presidency today, although those of you who follow these things closely will know that this has been roughly 3.5 years in the planning. So today is the beginning of execution after a very long planning phase where they have been gearing up domestically. They have been feeding into the TRIO program. They have been watching the Polish, shadowing them out of their presidency, and then coming into their own presidency as of today. So I would go so far as to say that 95% of the work of the presidency has been pre-thought, pre-reflected, and now it's just moving into execution phase. And of course, one of the first things the Danish will get is a very big gift from the European Commission. Scheduled at the next college meeting is the proposals for the multi-annual financial framework. I will touch on that in a little bit more detail in a second, but of course, this is a very big item, and it's going to be a huge discussion item in Brussels over the next 18 to 24 months. And that will start in a few weeks' time. And then, of course, we have the institutional summer break. So traditionally, that comes when the Parliament has its last plenary session of the year in July. There tends to be a sort of around about a 4 to 5 week gap between everybody coming back end of August for sort of la rentrée in September. And we'll come to the advice later, but very top line where Stefan and myself will be pushing you gently towards on today's webinar is that, number one, it feels like this summer is going to be very busy. Number two, it doesn't feel like things are necessarily going to stop in the way that we may wish them to do so. If you look at all of the different things going on, consultations coming up, it feels like it's going to keep a lot of people rather busy for most of the summer. And then looking ahead to the autumn, I think this is possibly going to be one of the busiest autumns of the term. So it's something that I did internally and externally for public affairs professionals, as we'll come to later. So externally, a lot is going to happen in September, and internally, of course, that's the fun time for all public affairs and organisations where you start to pull out your crystal ball and pull up your 2026 plans, budgets, and strategies. So plenty coming up, plenty happening, and we're going to try and guide you through that as best we can in the next 35 minutes. Now, just to remind you, we've been using this slide for a few of the webinars now. It's just a very, very useful reminder of a couple of things. Sort of the proposals that are still scheduled to come out in Q3 and Q4. And again, the reminder, as you will see here on the slide, very little of this is legislative. The majority of this is non-legislative fitness checks and evaluations. So again, a lot of discussion about the frameworks, future fitting, and very little legislative content. Put in red some of the bigger sort of legislative items. So obviously the multi-annual financial framework, the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act, digital networks, a bioeconomy strategy, something that, for example, the Danish presidency will be very big on, hoping to get out in Q4. And then the not so small matter of a targeted revision of the REACH regulation. Okay, so a few big items already planned for the autumn, but again, the rest of the context is very much about evaluating, shaping, and non-legislative action. So let's jump into what does the next month or 2 months effectively, because we will not see you again until September, because indeed we will have a summer break to jump out of this. So what is the European Commission planning? What's big for the Commission at the moment? Well, as I say, the biggest item by far for the European Commission to put forward in the next college meeting, or for adoption, it's scheduled for adoption in the upcoming college meeting, is the multi-annual financial framework proposal. And the publication of the proposal by the Commission is a little bit like, as a football analogy, excuse me if that's not your preferred sport, it's pretty much half-time. So basically, the European Commission has, for a good almost well over a year and a half, 2 years, been building up a proposal, has been basically talking to as many stakeholders as possible, has been looking to try and strike the right balance. And this MFF is probably the single most important and likely to be one of the most difficult to negotiate, because the EU would like to have, quote unquote, an ambitious budget to address current challenges. Of course, this comes at a time when every member state would like to see a quote unquote reduced budget to deal with these challenges. So there's going to be a conflict between European aspiration and member state reality. There is also something is going to be in here which is extremely controversial, or has proved to be very controversial for a long time, is the concept of own resources. So the European Commission has long requested its own budget line. So, for example, using taxes, carbon border mechanism taxes, to generate its own revenue stream. So again, there's going to be lots of ideas put in there as to, if the member states can't pay for this, well, how could the European programs perhaps pay for themselves? So there's going to be a lot of discussion kicked off when this comes out. It's obviously has a very interesting process to follow. The member states are driving. The European Parliament is involved, not on a co-deciding basis. So again, be prepared for this to come out and kick off probably because this has to be agreed by the end of 2028. So that will come out in the summer. Danish will take it forward in the council, but expect this the beginning of, you'll see lots of conferences, events. It's going to start winding up around the MFF. And then secondly, the omnibus packages continue. So many of them are already in sort of they post-proposal stage. Others have still got to be proposed by the Commission. But I think everybody now has seen the first omnibuses. You're getting a flavour of what to expect, how this works. And the speed at which some of these omnibus packages can move. Okay, so I think be ready if you are yet to have an omnibus package coming your way. it can move very quickly. So we then see that there was the securitization framework reform that came out on the 17th of June. That will now be subject to more discussions. The EU climate target for 2040, and then a master plan for a European high-speed rail network. Okay, so some pretty big items in there that they're going to push out just before or going into the summer. Now, if we talk about advice for the European Commission as we hit July and August, so first of all, keeping an eye on anything that's expected in Q3 and Q4. Particularly then if you think or fear the Commission is going to pull out any consultations that it may wish to run over the summer. It's keeping an eye on this. And then something in the background, I don't see this mentioned very often, and I think that's potentially a bit of a mistake. But of course, you should be keeping an eye out for any information you can get on Work Programme 2026. I appreciate it doesn't feel like yesterday that we got Work Programme 2025, and we're all coming to grips with understanding what Work Programme 2025 is. When already the European Commission, in its internal process in July into early August, will actually agree and start to finalise Work Programme 2026, which, as you will know from previous years, will come out in the autumn after the State of Union address that von der Leyen will make in September. As a note, Work Programme 2026 is going to be slightly different from previous iterations, and the process for agreeing it in the European Commission is different this year. Normally, the services propose new initiatives that they want. That goes up to the SecGen. The SecGen does a bit of a triage. There's a discussion, and that then becomes the prioritised list for the coming year. This year, this is not at all what's happening. The SecGen and the Commission and the President's Cabinet have taken control. They own the process. They have asked every DG to talk about issues or items they would love to remove. They have not been asked to give any new items. So everything's pivoted. The services are not asked for new things, and the ownership has moved up to the President's Cabinet. So there is probably something akin to what we see happening in many other areas of the Commission. The same thing is happening here. But nonetheless, keep an eye out for any leaked versions. Politico usually rather helpful when it comes to this, of what could be in major ticket items if there is something, or major burden reduction items that may be coming through in Work Programme 2026. So as the summer goes, start to expect to hear more on that. So that's a quick tour of the scene and the Commission. So with which I will hand over to Stefan to take us through the Parliament and the Council.
So thank you, Alan. I can only basically echo what you said regarding this will not be a very calm and peaceful summertime and summer break. The European Parliament is moving successfully into the more legislative role. So the preparatory phase in many aspects is over, and we are now actually getting ready for the legislative rush that will happen in autumn. So as soon as everybody is back in town, we will see quite a push towards more hands-on legislation happening. We still have committee meetings happening, we still have a plenary session, but then July will more or less wind up. But that being said, if you look at the things that you can do with the European Parliament at this point in time, I would highly encourage everyone to really check again a couple of things. It's very good to act early on these things. So if you are caught up in the legislative action, you will not have time to adapt your stakeholder maps, make sure that your messaging is correct, make sure that you have a plan B and plan C for possibly necessary compromise positions. So you really need to, or should use the time in the summer break to prepare your positions and prepare your advocacy efforts for the autumn period. It is also helpful because despite the MEPs, of course, being in the summer break, a lot of offices are actually working. So it's a good time if you have something that requires some more reading and maybe a conversation to stay in touch with some of the offices and engage in conversations with some of the staffers who will be in digestion mode to a degree. Some of them will be there, some of them won't, but it's a good opportunity to utilize because they will be less burdened or bogged down by everyday business than in other periods of time. It is also 4 weeks that you have time, if you need more data, more studies, or more facts, it's a very good time to basically commission that work to have it ready when everything gets going again. So I highly encourage this to use as a preparation phase for everything that will come. You can position yourself as a trusted expert, as a compromise builder, and this is really a phase that you should leverage in this regard. Then moving on to the other institution, and that is now undergoing a major change to a degree for the next 6 months. So we have the Danish taking over the presidency, which means 2 things. A, if you have not done that yet, familiarize yourself with the priorities of the Danish presidency. You can look into the document online. I would also encourage you to really already look into what is happening with the next presidency. So because after these 6 months, the subjects will take over. And this means that you can make sure that they're building their program. So you can already tap into that. The Danish have decided that their 2 main priorities will be a competitive but green Europe and a secure Europe. So we have something that is quite commonplace at the moment. So we have a strong emphasis on the defense and security of Europe, and we have the green transition. In some countries, let's say the competitiveness aspect is a bit stronger. The Danish chose to really also put some emphasis on the green transition. So in your position papers and in all the documentation that you write and everything that you plan to engage with the council, make sure that you incorporate the language of the Danish presidency as much as you can. It will make your positions easier digestible, and it will make you seem more up to date with what the priorities of the next presidency actually are. We also will see from a security point, very important, an EU-Moldova International Summit at the 4th of July. That highlights the fact that Ukraine may be at war at the moment, but let's say if Russia would win the war in Ukraine, it would not stop. It has a running war economy, and there is a very decent chance that Moldova would be next on the list. So the EU currently is not only fostering the accession negotiations with Ukraine, but also strengthening the bond to Moldova in order to get that belt secured to a degree. So in these things, so if you can tap into either the topic of securing Europe or the topic of greening Europe, making it more competitive, that is a very, very helpful strategy to go for. In terms of the green competitiveness, I also want to emphasize that the climate action goals remain in place. You just have this competitiveness aspect that you can strengthen. You already see that in some of the negotiations that are happening, for example, in the carbon dioxide emission debate with the automotive industry, etc. So the competitiveness aspect now really changes the positioning. But generally, it is unwise to challenge the goals completely. It is a doable pathway to say we need to get to these goals in a more competitive way, in a better, smarter way than we have done in the past. I sort of skipped ahead before moving this slide. I'm very sorry for that. There are a couple of other things that you can already do in terms of the council, the advice in working with the council. Again, the briefing materials should be tailored to the Danish priorities. And if you can somehow tap into the EU Moldova Summit, that is a meeting you definitely want to be not only aware of, but engage with early on. So make sure that you find out who is preparing these summits inside the Commission and inside the Council, and get in touch with these people to put your papers forward and your ideas forward. There are a couple of other really important developments. If you're in a specific sector, there's the European Space Forum. So everything regarding space is a very good time to actually take part in that, to position yourself in that. It brings together industry leaders, policymakers, experts. It's a really, really useful networking event that basically happens literally tomorrow. The same thing is true for health technology. So if you're working in health, if you're working in the health technology space, also definitely an event you want to take part in. And if you're more like me in the communications area of the world, the 3rd and 4th of July is the big event. That's the largest annual gathering of public communications experts. And all of the EU institutions are involved. It's the 16th edition of this. And it's really a good moment in time to not only connect to other professionals, but also to the people inside the institutions that have to do with this. Last but not least, a really critical one is the EU-China Summit. These summits happen once a year. It's a very good opportunity, especially in a time where trade and trade negotiations, and we lately had it with the rare earth debate. It's a very good moment in time to immerse yourself and engage yourself into the relation between the EU and China. If you have any ideas or proposals how better compromise can be built, there is debate about, do we need local content? Is the carbon border adjustment mechanism actually working well, or is it actually benefiting China more? There's a very good moment in time to put forward these positions and make sure that your voice is actually being heard. So moving that, the key to all of these meetings is to plan ahead, make sure you know who is attending, and you know how to talk to these people, and you know who you are sending there, who is your ambassador. Are they equipped with the necessary briefing materials? Do they have a clear message to take when they're talking to certain stakeholders? Do they even understand which stakeholders are there? Sometimes that's not the case, then you need to prepare them better. Make sure, if you can create that, to create touch points alongside the events to make sure you have the maximum of engagement possible there. And if you can also, in terms of your off-the-record contacts, make sure you have stakeholder meetings planned. If it's on the record, make sure your communications efforts also circle around the event. Such events are always a time where the media are naturally aware of a certain topic. It's a very good moment to surf the wave of communications and put your own messages forward as well. And then, of course, there is the preparation of the rentrée, but I am going to hand it over to Alan for that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Stefan. And I certainly get a sense of which of those conferences you will be attending in the coming months, Stefan. So good. Excellent. So as Stefan said, we now come to this period of the summer break. So just as we think about this, well, first of all, let's just be clear, or try to be clear, what we mean by the summer break. So technically, the last working week of the European Parliament is up until the 25th of July. However, don't be fooled, because the last actual sort of what I would call working week of the Parliament is is the week before. So the last parliamentary week runs until the 17th of July. The last working week of the Parliament is for external parliamentary activities. So that tends to be less a time when you're engaging, a time perhaps when parliamentarians are elsewhere. So effectively, the Parliament kind of closes down as of the 17th of July, and certainly you're unlikely to find many MEPs floating around in Brussels after that date. Then you would have the Council Okay, so when you comes to the council, they tend to organise their meetings until the last week of July. And they then tend to take the month of August and they start work again in September. That's the normal planning cycle. The European Commission is very much aligned with the Council. They tend, and I'm being very careful with my words here, they tend to stop also for the month of August. Now, this year, as both Stefan and myself have highlighted, the legislative machinery is moving through the gears. So the legislative files, the non-legislative reviews, and also a wave of implementing and delegating acts are all coming through the system, which means that the European Commission is going to, very likely in the next 3 weeks, put out a lot of new documents, perhaps quite a few consultations on different issues, all perfectly timed for you and your organization to have to deal with over the summer break. This is, I suspect, everyone on the call has been in this particular position, and I think you should possibly expect to be in that position again this summer. So what we suggest in terms of before the summer break, so the first is it's a good opportunity to review a little bit what your Q3 and Q4 looks like. What are your main strategies, your tactics? Do you have things planned in, campaigns, meetings, events? Are you organized? Are you ready? How much agility do you need to have? It's whilst you might not have a great deal of time now because you're, I hope, trying to get some holiday, in addition to surviving the current heat that we have, you're probably also aware that many of your internal colleagues are going to be off. So it's not the greatest time internally. And so, yes, it might be a challenge now, but that's nothing compared to the challenge that it's going to be as of the 1st of September when 400 things are happening at once. So it's at least a relatively better moment to really assess what you've got for the autumn, and then being really rather comprehensive in your planning for September onwards. What do I need to do? When do I need to do it? How are we going to do this? What are our objectives? The clearer you can be on this now, the easier it is going to be when you come back mid-August into September. And then also, of course, internally, linked to Q3 and Q4 objectives, linked to the timetable of the Commission, linked to this wave of legislation, both legislative and implementing and delegated acts, coupled with any echoes of the 2026 work programme, is going to feed into your internal. No matter if you're a trade association, an NGO, or a company, you will be asked. Everybody has a slightly different cycle to think of what your 2026 plan is, what's important, what should be prioritized, and what are the resources and budgets that would go with this. So somehow you need to already be thinking about, do you have the best strategic slides? Do you have the best budget link? Do you have great objectives? Those are key things that are, of course, going to be something that you're going to have to deal with. And our suggestion is that they are things for you to consider before the summer break. Because then when it comes back to the rentrée, when it comes back to the return to work, our estimation is that September is going to be one of the busiest months of the whole 2025 cycle. There are a lot of things happening. Again, it may not all be legislative, but do not let that fool you for 1 second. If you're touched by an omnibus, you've got some implementing and delegated acts behind. The MFF is circling overhead. Plus, a lot of these evaluations are probably looking at one or several of the areas in which you operate and are thinking about targeted changes for the future. It's going to mean that it's going to be rather busy. So again, being prepared for this is, of course, the best thing. Again, as we say, the plans in place and being able to act with agility through September to sort of pivot both externally and internally. And then last but not least, the big thing for the rentrée, as linked to your internal work, but also your external engagement work, is going to be the 2026 work programme and the State of Union address, and where the Commission intends to take the project next. So back to what we would remind you of this month as we head in July. So as Stefan outlined, the Danish presidency, familiarise yourself with their priorities. Make sure that is then reflected in some of your engagement materials that you're putting out. And, Stefan, like the good advocacy professional that he is, was remiss that if he had not have reminded you that if you're looking at the presidencies, you should be thinking of the next 1 and 2 to get ahead of yourself. Okay, so focus on the Danish, their priorities, what the key words are, what's important, but start looking ahead. Just as a note, also in July, the Transparency Register is scheduled to review in July 2025, so something to keep on your checklist. And then, of course, we go into the institutional summer break, but that does not necessarily translate into a public affairs summer break, just so we are clear. And then, as we have done every month, just a quick reminder of the belief that advocacy strategy has that structured public affairs is the key to successful public affairs. So very briefly, what we talk about is how you prioritize, how you build data and insights to make the best choices as to what you're going to focus on. Then you do your situation analysis and set up your monitoring around what is most important for you. Then you build out your positions, so your position papers, your message houses. You look out your stakeholder assessment and you look at what alliances and associations would fit the best picture for you strategically, which then leads into your strategy formulation. What is your top line strategy going to be? Are you going to do this yourself? Are you going to work with others? Are you going to be front foot, back foot? All the strategic choices you need to make, leading to your direct engagement and outreach tactics. So you're doing this yourself, which meetings, on what subject, and what do you need to be prepared and empowered to do that? Then, of course, the indirect piece, mostly working through trade associations for most people. How do you leverage your trade association? If you're a trade association, how do you leverage your members? Okay, so it goes a little bit both ways. And then, making sure that you check in to evaluate and measure. Is what I'm doing working? Am I heading towards my objective? Are my tactics working? And that then feeds into all of the internal reporting that you have to do within your organization. Okay, so what we are reflecting on as we hit the summer is we're highlighting that in the autumn, you will be requested to go back into some form of prioritization exercise for 2026. Okay, you'll be requested to do that again. You will constantly be updating your situation analysis because things are changing quite quickly and a lot of things are happening, which means that you're constantly required to look at your position papers, your stakeholders, your alliances, because as so many things are happening and many things are a broader level, it means that there are many more possibilities for alliances and stakeholder connections than perhaps have traditionally been the case. So you will be asked for a 2026 strategy. So you should be thinking about how you formulate this. In that strategy, you will have to cover how you're going to do things directly. It's then an opportunity to evaluate your trade associations, any alliances you've got, and checking in right now on, is what I am doing working and what do I plan to do, continue or change as I hit Q3 and Q4. Hopefully that is then useful. This is our July overview as usual. But now I will hand back to Michelle to see if there are any questions or comments that Stefan and myself could answer.
Thank you very much, Alan and Stefan. And once again, an incredibly rich webinar. Really surprising that all of this is free. And I'm proud of it. And I hope that everybody attending spreads the word. These are popular and they should get as much play as possible. I just want to put that plug in because I've been impressed with this one. And while I'm talking about the content, thanks also to our researchers, Mirela and Giacomo, who've put this together. Great work, guys. Really fantastic. A super solid pre-summer webinar. There was one question before we close out, which is this. If we need to catch up on gathering intel on the 2026 work program, where should we start in light of the different approach that is being taken this year? Do you want me to read that again?
No, it's fine. I completely understand the question, and unfortunately, there is no good news in the answer to this. So normally, in a normal year, getting information on the work program is quite challenging because this is really internal cooking of the European Commission. But because you have so many services involved, there's such a process of backwards and forwards, you do tend to find out what is going on. So I think this year, as it has all been centralized at the top, it makes it much more challenging. I think the only thing that you might have easier access to is if you have good connections with one particular DG, the DG or the DGs that you are most interacting with. You may be able to find out from them what they have submitted as any initiatives that they would like to see removed or cut or changes. So that's one thing that I think you could probably find out. But to get the whole picture, I think that will only come into the public domain as and when the powers that be in the European Commission wish that to come into the public domain. That is going to be, unless you have good links in the SecGen or the President's Cabinet, that could be a difficult document to get your hands on. But Stefan, maybe you have some more to add to that?
I basically, there is no direct way of doing this. The one way was already described by Alan. We currently face the second-timer commission that is highly centralized. They created an artificial bottleneck at the top, and there is a lot of control going down from the president's office to the different parts of the commission. So I would almost say that nobody will have the full picture beside those guys on the 13th floor for a very long time. The ones who also a secondary source of information, if you have good relations with some of the journalists in the marketplace here in Brussels, some of them are very well tapped into the services. So that's a secondary road if you want to capture bits and pieces of the puzzle. If you have a good relationship with them, they might share that information with you. That's usually kind of a bizarre type of negotiation in a way, give and take information. But you will have to do a lot of digging, and you will get only puzzle pieces here and there, and it will be up to you to put them together and fill in the blanks.
Okay, thank you. I see another question has come in, and we do have a couple more minutes, so I just want to take a look at that. If you were in the shoes of a small trade association secretariat, whose members are pushing, sorry, let me start again. If you were in the shoes of a small trade association secretariat whose members are pushing to run an event to, quote, increase the visibility of the work of the trade association, unquote, not a joke in parentheses, when in the second half do you think it would be optimal?
Maybe I start with that one. It's the trade association work is something I do quite frequently. So if you look into the calendar, there are not too many weeks where actually an event makes sense. So the event will certainly need to have members of the European Parliament present. So the green weeks are out of the picture, for example. That boils it down. Then you have, so if you look at the days, actually, not weeks, that are really fit for purpose in terms of having an event from September to December, that's a very limited number. If you're a small trade association, you will have competition, and you will likely have big competition. So what you need to do is either band together with allies to create a bigger event, bigger visibility, or you need to come up with something quite creative, exceptional, interesting. And I would also very much suggest that you basically start now to get some high-level speaker to take part in it. If you have, I call that an audience magnet. If you have someone high-ranking from the Commission, a coveted member of the European Parliament as a keynote speaker, etc., that will give you more attendance. In terms of the timing, when, I would say, when the rentrée happens, so September most likely will be not the ideal time. Everybody is doing events there. I would rather look a little bit into October, November. Still, that being said, there will be competition. There is no ideal time for that. So it's a long-winded answer, but there is no simple one.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just going to add something for you there, Charles. Just to say, by the way, I fully sympathise with your situation here. It's amazing how many organisations want to do an event to quote unquote raise our visibility. Of course, everything Stefan said is valid on the assumption that you actually have a genuine topic to talk about. Okay, yeah. So if you feel that you don't have a pressing topic that's linked to the agenda, because it's very difficult to, you can destroy your visibility by holding an event that's off topic at the wrong time. So everything that Stefan said holds true if you have some content or a subject or something to add to a relevant discussion that's ongoing. If you don't, or you're a bit nervous about how doing this, you do have a get out of jail free card as of around about around the last week of November, by holding a Christmas reception, okay, which is an event where you can host people. The theme is Christmas, and everybody loves Christmas, that you can showcase a little bit what you do in a sense that's not quite as relevant. So if you have content and a subject that's relevant, go for it, as Stefan said. If you don't, or you're nervous, you've got the get out of jail free card at the end of the year, Charles. And it's also a nicer time to have a drink.
Okay, thank you very much again to our presenters and to our researchers and to everyone who took the time out of their very busy days to be with us at lunchtime today. The next webinar will be early September on the 9th, as you see there. We will send out invitations. We will also post the slides, and we will also make the entire video of this available to those who attended. We will post the slides on LinkedIn. Keep an eye out for that and help spread the word about this uniquely valuable free content once a month on how to do public affairs in Brussels. And with that, have a great summer, everyone, and see you in September.
Thank you. Enjoy the summer break.
Enjoy the heat. Take care.
Yeah.